nice tree. We're gonna do two trees at the same time because they're so close to, so they're so similar that there's not a lot of differences. So I'll talk about the differences. We're gonna do the Jeffrey pine here and the Ponderosa pine. A lot of times they're mixed together, but typically they're differentiated by elevation. Ponderosa pines like to grow in a little lower elevations. We're in the Tahoe Basin right now at about 7,000 feet. So anything over about 6,000 feet in this area, 6,000 up to way about 9 to 10,000 feet is the Jeffrey pine. And 6,000 and below, there's a few down at lake level in Tahoe. You'll see the Ponderosa pine. But upon just looking at them from a distance, it's hard to tell them apart. The timber industry, this is kind of the mainstay of logging on the west coast here. Probably the most common timber tree. The timber industry doesn't differentiate from the wood of these. They're exactly the same, and they don't differentiate those. But there are differences in these trees. One of the big differences I like to show people is this is a mature tree, and they get these big plates on them. And if you jam your nose into one of these plates and smell, you get a strong vanilla, or some people say butterscotch. Now, the Ponderosas don't have that smell. A lot of people say they smell like butterscotch. These are pineapple and vanilla. But they definitely smell, kind of in the middle of summer when they're growing a lot, they smell more too. So that's one of the differences. They both get the same scaly look. The Ponderosas kind of have a more yellowy, bigger plated look. So I'll try to insert a picture of one of those in there to show you the difference. Now, the easiest way to tell the difference between these two trees is the pine cones. And they're nice beehive-shaped pine cones. And you see the little needles here? The Ponderosa pines stick out, and they'll hurt you when you do this to them. But the Jeffreys go straight down. Well, a way to remember the difference is gentle Jeffrey, prickly Ponderosa. So pine cones are very similar, beehive shaped. These ones are much prettier. The Ponderosas are similar, but they kind of open up. They're not as neat looking. So that's a good way to tell them apart. They both have, I couldn't get any needles from this tree because Ponderosas, and especially the Jeffreys, grow, the lower limbs die off. So it's a long way up to branches. But their needles are usually like 4 to 6 inches long, come in bundles of 3. Another strange characteristic that the Ponderosa has that the Jeffrey doesn't, if you look hard enough, you can find some in bundles of 2. So the Jeffreys like the open forest. This is typical to see a mature Jeffrey in a higher slope by itself because the fire usually clears it out. Ponderosas tend to be more in forested. They'll grow together. So this is growing at a higher elevation with some fir trees. There's some white firs and some red firs around here. Ponderosas tend to grow at a lower elevation. They'll be the more dominant tree. All right, this is an example of a mature Jeffrey that's growing in a forest that hasn't seen fire for a while. As you can see, there's a lot of younger fir trees. It's getting pretty overgrown, and the ground is littered with cones. And these trees like to grow in open areas. As you can see, there was a previous fire here, and this has been burned out, but it survived. The mature trees survive, and then they grow in the open area created by the fire, and that's what opens the cones, and that's when they repopulate themselves. So we're in the Tahoe Basin, and as you can see, it's overgrown. It's kind of due for a fire, some fire management. But yeah, Jeffreys prefer open forest much more than the Ponderosa pines. But you'll see these higher up all by themselves, these big old grand mature trees. When they're younger, it's really hard to, they don't have this plate-like appearance. It's really hard to tell which tree's what without looking at the cones. So look for the cones and stick your nose in the cracks, and that's how you're going to be able to tell these trees apart. They're a really cool tree, really common. Another really unique thing about the Jeffrey pines, Ponderosas are all over the west coast. The Jeffreys only grow in California, nowhere else. They grow maybe a little bit in southern Oregon, and a little bit in Baja California. But they're unique to California. So when you're up hiking in the Sierra, and you find one of these trees, stick your nose in there, people will wonder what the hell you're doing, but it's actually a really cool smell. It's fun, and they're a really beautiful tree. And one other thing I didn't talk about is the crowns of these. Check out the crown here. You notice there's no branches down lower, and when they get really mature, both Ponderosas and the Jeffreys are very conical in shape, so they're very like a pyramid shape. When the Jeffreys get bigger like this, they tend to flatten out their crown. So that's another way to differentiate them. So you're more likely to see a Jeffrey kind of all by itself in a more open forested area. All right, so one other interesting fact about these trees that to differentiate from Ponderosas and Jeffreys, they used to distill the trees, the Ponderosa trees, to get turpentine out of them. And the Jeffreys actually have a chemical, it's a petrochemical called heptane, very, very explosive chemical. So sometimes when they would confuse the species, they would have a bad result, and that would explode. So heptane is something we used to put in gasoline years ago to up the octane. So they no longer get it out of the trees, but just an interesting fact about a way to differentiate the two trees. So